Good evening, everyone. My name is Sam Nasser, and this is the Azure Cleveland User Group. A little bit about the group. We meet every second Wednesday. The meetings are free of charge and open to the public, and we cover a variety of topics related to Azure, such as infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. You can find meeting information posted on meetup.com at the link listed below on the bottom of the slide. Some general information, please keep in mind participation is always encouraged, and the only stupid question is the one not being asked, so feel free to speak up if something's on your mind. However, when not speaking, kindly ask you to mute your microphones just to prevent any background noise. And we want to keep it casual but organized, so feel free to jump in with questions or comments, but at the same time, we want to give our speaker enough time to go through all the slides and the demos. And lastly, the presentation will be recorded and will be posted on YouTube in a few short days. So for tonight's presentation, we have protecting your critical applications with Azure Front Door, and that will be presented by Derek Smith. Derek is the Director of Cloud and Strategic Alliances and Brand at Trace3. He also engages clients to help transform business apps and operations to the cloud. And he's heavily involved in the Azure community as a mentor, speaker, and content creator. Derek joins us from South Carolina, and we're glad to have you with us, Derek. So with that, I will turn it over to you.
Appreciate you having me, and we're going to talk today about protecting our critical applications with Azure Front Door. And when I talk about critical applications, I am talking about specifically those applications that would be referred to as a company's crown jewel applications, the ones that bring them in the most money or handle some critical, important process that the organization would literally be grounded to a halt if it simply stopped working. Now, in order to best understand how to protect these critical applications, I want to take a step back and talk about where ultimately I see Front Door playing a very key role, not just from a networking perspective, but ultimately from an application design perspective. And this brings into our conversation of cloud resiliency, and specifically around the SRE concept that Google developed a number of years ago. SRE, for those who don't know, is site reliability engineering. And this plays a very key role in our topic tonight, in that a lot of organizations are coming around on the SRE model. I think when it was first released, a lot of people kind of, as I think with most things that Google does from time to time, take a look at it and be like, oh, that's just a Google thing. You know, it only really applies to them, and it's kind of pie in the sky type of situation. However, it's been about 8 years since SRE was released, and now, believe it or not, that model is really growing, especially with large organizations, even smaller organizations, and they are now racing to adopt SRE practices. And what this ultimately means for us from a Front Door perspective is when you're looking to employ that SRE model, those engineers need to focus on the overall infrastructure of those crown jewel applications. And one method of that model as it relates to SRE is its overall reliability, and looking at how often or what is our rate that we can tolerate from a downtime perspective. And most organizations refer to this as our I refer to this as our availability budget. And the reason why that's so important is it means they can only tolerate a certain amount of downtime per year, right? So I allot my organization X amount of minutes of downtime and saying, okay, over the year, this is the amount of time that it can be down, whether it be for maintenance or upgrades or whatever it may be. So we're given a certain budget to deal with, and as you keep eating away at that budget, your window for toleration of a potential unplanned outage becomes smaller and smaller. Now, of all of those practices within SRE, The most prominent one that we typically see are things around continuous integration and continuous delivery and how we're delivering our apps in a responsible way. Incident response, how quickly we're responding to a potential outage. The overall observability of those applications. Are we getting adequate health checks? Are we responding to user requests? Is the web pages loading in the appropriate manner? How quickly are they loading? How often users are staying on certain pages? And then finally, we have our postmortems and intro incident retrospectives for after a breach is dealt with. Now, this is all becoming very mainstream, and a lot of organizations plan on growing their SRE practices or starting to adopt one. And where Front Door will come into a key area for this part of adoption is around its ability to monitor and alert on your application. And we'll dive into what that looks like here in a little bit when I dive into the demo. The ability to measure and deliver user happiness. And what I mean by user happiness, if anybody was, I hate bringing up them, but if anybody was on Amazon yesterday, it was Prime Day, right? Do you know how unhappy a lot of those users would be if Amazon was suddenly unavailable during Prime Day? Yeah, it would be really ugly. People would be coming out of the woodworks, right? So the ability to measure and make sure that users are happy, users are able to get to where they need to go. Understanding that service health and essentially avoiding any of those financial penalties that are associated with SLAs. Now, of all of those drivers, the most common SLOs are gonna revolve around three main service types: user-facing services like web applications, APIs, and compute platforms, specifically container orchestration, Kubernetes, things of that nature. And the good thing for us is Front Door supports all of those, whether it be virtual machines or traditional infrastructure loads, AKS, right? Azure Kubernetes services, PaaS services like app services, APIs, and functions. So of all those drivers that organizations are looking at to drive their SRE adoption, their SRE maturity, Front Door is going to play a critical role in all of those key areas. And so it's important to, I think, understand this particular service, how best to implement this service, where to implement it. And this little decision tree typically helps. This is from Microsoft's document page of load balancing solutions and where you should implement. And you'll notice that Front Door is the most leveraged implementation option in their little chart right here, outside of, I think, Application Gateway. And then how do we start getting all of the data and the metrics, right? That observability, the service health, the uptime, user happiness, all of those various things. So key things to understand about Azure Front Door is that is a global scalable entry point that uses Microsoft's global network to create a very fast and secure way to access your web applications. And I say web applications in plural because, yes, it can support multiple applications. It doesn't support just one application itself. Now, Front Door works at the layer 7 instance, right? Using a Anycast protocol to split that TCP packet in order to reach either your application that's hosted in one region or potentially your application hosted in another region. Now, it does this specifically because of the global nature of its service and its ability to improve overall global connectivity. Now, depending on the routing method that you select within Front Door, and there are quite a few of them, Front Door will route your client requests to typically the most fastest or most available application backend, depending on your selection. Now, an application backend could be really any internet-facing service, right? It could be a virtual machine, could be a web application, could be a function, could be a Kubernetes cluster, it could be a container, right? It really doesn't matter. As long as it's internet-facing, it can touch it. And it doesn't even have to be inside of Azure. It can be on-prem. It could be over in AWS. It could be over in GCP, right? It really doesn't matter. As long as it has a public IP, you can put Front Door in front of that. Now, Front Door does provide quite a wide range of traffic routing methods. And if any of you are familiar with Azure Traffic Manager, then you're very familiar with Azure Front Door's routing methods because they're pretty much identical. So you can do weighted, you can do regional, you can do based on quickest response time, right? So any of those various routing methods are completely available. In addition, it also has a number of different backend health monitoring options to suit your application's needs. And every application is a bit different. So depending on your development teams, the type of runtime that's available in your application, you can tweak your monitoring options to best suit the application and not just do a blanket health policy for everything. And it's important to have those health monitoring options. The reason being is because Azure Front Door supports a automatic failover scenario, it's critical that the service is getting the correct data out of the application in order to best inform it about when it needs to perform one of those functions. So I know, at least with certain implementations I've seen out there in the wild, especially when it comes to Azure Application Gateway, a lot of clients like to just create a standard health probe for their applications, put that on the application gateway and say, hey, that's good enough. It's just going to monitor that and I'm good to go. For regional implementations, that might be okay. But for something where we're looking at enabling a global scale application that we need to be highly resilient and highly responsive to potential faults or incidences, having that data, that monitoring data is critical. Now, ultimately, what is the difference between Front Door and Application Gateway? As I've talked about Application Gateway a couple of times, it's purely that the Front Door is a global service, right? It does not have a region that it lives in. It is a global service. It is available in every single region within Azure, whereas Application Gateway is a regional service. You have to put it in East US, or you have to put it in Central US, or you have to put it in West Europe, right? It is specific to the region that it's in, not a global one. And the good thing is Front Door can load balance between all of those different clusters or units across the various regions. App Gateway only load balances between the VMs or containers or other web-facing workloads that are within that particular scale unit. It is not the same as Front Door itself. And you're probably asking yourself, okay, Front Door, it sounds like it's something new. It sounds like it's something I may not necessarily have heard of, or I've kind of heard about it. But has it been battle tested? And the answer is yes, it has been. It's been battle tested for the better part of a decade. The reason being is Microsoft leverages Azure Front Door to present Office 365. So you've actually been leveraging Azure Front Door for the better part of a decade. Every time you've gone to portal.office.com or admin.microsoft.com or portal.azure.com, you're all going through Azure Front Door. This is one of the many services where Microsoft eats what it serves, right? So it's providing you Front Door as a service that you can use for your applications. It is actually something they use internally to serve up Azure, Microsoft 365, Office 365, and many of the other Microsoft cloud platforms. Now, recently Front Door went under a certain revamp, and this was because in response to Front Door did not handle dynamic content very well. It was kind of a known issue with the Front Door service. And so typically, if you wanted to leverage something like a content delivery network for videos or constantly changing images or things of that nature, Front Door was not a good option for you as a client. And so the Azure team really struggled to gain a lot of traction with a lot of clients because of this. So they took a lot of that feedback from clients, customers, and partners, and made a lot of changes to Front Door to really enhance its capabilities, mainly that ability to deliver that content through the service, both static and dynamic content, as well as being able to really kind of supercharge or accelerate those capabilities. Now, what came out of that are, instead of having a single Front Door SKU, we now have 2 SKUs, and the other has been labeled as classic. And I don't have any definitive word on that, so please don't quote me, but I'm guessing it'll be deprecated at some point here, as most classic services tend to happen. Now, 2 brand new SKUs. Standard SKU, which is, I don't want to say your basic SKU, but it is your standard SKU. It is your standard implementation of Azure Front Door with Azure CDN as well as the Azure Web Application Firewall. So you're going to get that content delivery capabilities of CDN. You're going to get the normal functions that you would expect from an Azure Front Door. So the Ssl offloading, global load balancing, your domain and certificate management, and your traffic analytics. And you get your basic security capabilities of the Azure Web Application Firewall. Now, one thing to note about the Azure Front Door SKU as it relates to the Azure WAF, it does not support the pre-loaded OWASP rule set. It only supports your custom rule sets. So if you want to use the standard SKU, you essentially have to bring your own web threat workloads, or not workloads, your own web threat rule sets and load them into your Azure WAF policy engine for you to essentially mitigate those threats. Now, if you need those OWASP rule sets, or you need even more extensive security capabilities, then you would then step up to the premium SKU, where you do have the option to go ahead and extend those more enhanced capabilities across the WAF. It also adds in bot protection, right? So if a bot is trying to spam my application or my API or whatever, right, that support is available within premium SKU, where you can mitigate against that type of attack vector. It also supports private link. So as a security nut myself, I don't like exposing my services over the public internet, where, if at all possible, I like to have my front end communicate privately to my back end. So while the standard SKU does not support that, right, I have to go from public to public. The premium SKU supports private links. So if I want to place a private endpoint, say on my Azure App Service, or my Azure Kubernetes cluster, or my Azure virtual machine, or whichever backend service I'm using, I can do so. And my Azure Front Door premium SKU can still communicate with that service. Now, obviously, that would hinder us from, say, like a multi-cloud perspective. So if I were putting Front Door in front of, say, like a GCP workload or an AWS workload, private link support wouldn't mean much to us. I'm confident there's probably a workaround out there where somebody has spun up a private link for those multi-cloud workloads. However, the SLA and supportability of that would be probably highly questionable. So I don't typically recommend it from that perspective. The other fun thing within Premium SKU is we do get additional integration with Microsoft's threat intelligence and security analytics service. So all of the Fun little things that the threat intel team is picking up on out there in the dark web gets fed into your WAF with the premiums queue. The standard version does not get those benefits in any way, shape, or form. So how do we go about creating a front door within Azure? Well, the first thing you're going to need to do is go into a new service and go ahead and create the front door. You're going to get prompted about whether you, which options you would like to select, whether it be the classic or the newer versions. Obviously, we want to select the newer versions itself. Now, in configuring this, because it is a global service and because it is public, the host name must be globally unique within all of Azure itself. So please be mindful when you're putting in that host name, it does need to be very unique, and you're going to get a very less ugly, but still ugly domain with it, .azurefd.net. Obviously, we'll get rid of that in a moment, but just by default, you're going to see those. In addition, you can enable a couple of other features. By default, we want to make sure that we're going to go ahead and add our custom domain, which we can do right here in the main selection option from a front door perspective. And you can have front door manage the SSL certificate for that if you so choose, or you can bring your own. It is up to you to decide on that particular capability. Well, once we've set all of that up, you're going to go ahead and add a backend pool. Again, your backend pool just needs to be, if it's non-Azure, any publicly available endpoint that it can reach. And then depending on your SKU, if you have the standard, it needs to be a Azure service that is publicly available. And I'll show you how you can select some of those services in the demo in a little bit. Or if you're leveraging premium, you can select a private endpoint. After that, pretty straightforward. We're going to add in a couple of routing rules, much like we would do with our Azure Application Gateway. This essentially is just telling the front door service how to route client traffic back from the front end host to your designated backend pool itself. Now, the front door routing rule is composed of two parts, right? Essentially what they designate as the left-hand side and the right-hand side. Now, essentially what this means is it basically decides how it's going to match the incoming traffic when it comes into front door. Now, front door starts with the left-hand side of the route, right? The right-hand side defines how front door is going to process the request. And so what I mean by that is the first thing front door is going to look at is whether or not it's HTTP or HTTPS. It's going to look at the host name, right? So something like Microsoft.com or Bing.com or star.github.com, right? Whatever it may be. And then it's going to examine the path, right? So /users/ images / videos / whatever it may be, right? So I'm going to start on the left-hand side, protocol, look at my hosts, go to my right side for the path. Now, once this has been examined, right, the front door then starts speeding up the processing of those requests, right? So as more requests come in, it's going to cache a lot of that left-hand side of the information to start looking at commonalities for specific routes, right? So instead of needing to constantly ping all the way back and forth from the front end to the back end, right? When the first couple of requests do that sort of response, front door is going to cache that in there. So instead of the user needing to go all the way, it's just going to hit the cache inside of the front door, which then greatly speeds up our response times for our applications. Now, typically, Front Door does attempt to match the most specific route first. Again, looking from left to right. Now, if it doesn't find that exact match, it's going to start chipping away from right to left, say, okay, I didn't find an exact match for the whole pattern, but let me take off the slash images, right? Is there something for just the domain, right? It's going to slowly work itself way backward. If it does not find a match beyond that point, then ultimately it's going to reject that request, and you're going to get the lovely 400 bad request error within your thing. So if there are no exact matches for the front end host, typically I do recommend you put some sort of catch-all, right? So the /star, ensuring that there will be something that catches a specific route, and make sure you're routing it to the appropriate destination. Now, again, our backend targets can be any number of different services that we can take a look at. Now, Front Door does support auto discovery, specifically within our Azure services. So depending on the host type that I select, whether it be app service or virtual machine, I can then start looking up per my Azure subscription to see if I can find the specific backend host that I'm looking for, and Front Door will auto discover all of the various app services or virtual machines or Kubernetes clusters or web apps or whatever it may be for you, and also then pull the host header information for it to communicate on. Now, if you select custom host as your type, auto discovery is obviously not supported in that situation. You'll have to provide the specific host name or the specific IP, depending on where you're hitting and which method you would like to connect. Now, beyond that, you will need to specify the HTTP and HTTPS port, assuming they are the non-standard ports. If you're using the standard ones, that's fine. That'll be auto-populated for you. Excuse me. And then finally, we have our await and priority. Again, priorities are a way for us to define our different backends that you want to use a primary service for all traffic. So maybe there's a particular VM or cluster that has more horsepower, right? So that's my first service, right? So I may assign that a priority of 1, and then I start assigning different clusters as 2, 3, 4, and 5, right? And those are backups to that primary, or if that primary becomes available, right, or even the backup becomes available, right, then I have a backup of a backup. So I can scale out how I want my traffic to be assigned a different priority. The other feature there is weight, and this obviously is assigning the weight to our different backends to distribute the traffic across the different clusters we may be leveraging. Now, you can do it evenly, which is the weight of 50, which is what you see here in my little screenshot there, or you can assign a different custom weight and, you know, play with that coefficient a little differently. If you want a certain backend to handle 80% of the traffic, right, then I put a weight of 80 in there, and then maybe I put another backend with a weight of 20, right, so it only gets 20% of the weight. So depending on how you want to divvy up the different traffic loads, you can certainly do so with the weight coefficient. Now, I touched on health probes earlier and kind of the importance of this to your application as well as to the overall reliability that you see. The reason is we want to make sure that we're determining that health and proximity of each backend for your given front door environment. Now, each front door sends periodic synthetic HTTP or HTTP requests, depending on which type of health probe protocol you choose. and then to each of your configured backends. Front Door then uses the response from the health probe to go ahead and determine which is the best backend resource to route your various client requests. Now, this health probe is sent over the same TCP port that you configured for routing your client requests. So unlike the application gateway where you could potentially send your health probe over a different port, or even with the Azure Load Balancer, you could send it over a different port. The Azure Front Door, you cannot, and it cannot be overridden either. So if you select 443 as your HTTPS port, guess what? Your health probe is going to go over 443. If you select HTTPS as the protocol, same thing with HTTP. If you select 80 and you want your health probe to be on HTTP as a protocol, then it's going to go over port 80. Now, Azure Front Door uses a 3-step process to determine the health, right? So we're going to take a look at excluding disabled backends. And I apologize for my throat here. Now, what do I mean by excluding backends, disabled backends? If your backends are disabled for maintenance reasons or whatever, they're going to be excluded. If a backend has a health probe error, then those are going to get excluded, right? And this is done by looking at the last health probe responses. And if a certain number of those are unhealthy, or sorry, if a certain number of those are healthy, right, then it's going to be considered healthy. If a certain configuration configured by is changed by the sample size property in the load balancing settings, and then finally, if the number is of healthy probes is configured, right, by changing the successful sample required property in the load balancing settings, right, all of those are going to be potentially excluded. Now, for the sets of healthy backends in the backend pool, Front Door does also measure and maintain the latency between them. So you should take in account, right? Disabled backends, those will be excluded. Backends that have healthy probe errors, right? All of those are going to be excluded based on one of those 3 criterias. And then finally, round trip time or latency will also be measured. So quite a bit of extensive health probe capabilities in order to determine what applications are healthy and which ones are not. And then finally, pretty standard, Front Door does support SSL offloading or end-to-end SSL encryption, depending on which option you prefer within your organization. So depending on whether or not you need SSL to go all the way, great. Front Door can do that and forward those requests on. Or if you want Front Door to handle the TLS SSL offload, then you can absolutely configure that as well. All right, enough of me going through slides. Let's go into a demo. I do not like death by PowerPoint. So here is my Azure environment, and I'm going to go ahead and go up here to the top, type in Front Door. Now you are going to see the name is Front Door and CDN profiles. So we're going to go ahead and select that. I do have a Front Door already configured. We'll get to that one in just a minute, but I do want to go through and just show you exactly what you're going to see. Now, as I mentioned earlier, you're going to have 2 different choices. I can either go with the current Front Door offering, which is the standard or the premium, or I can select other offerings and I can spin up the Front Door Classic or even the CDN Classic or some of the other Azure CDN services from either Verizon or Akamai. but really Microsoft wants you to focus in on the newer front door SKU, which is their preferred method for the content delivery capabilities. From there, I can either choose to quickly create my front door, basically just taking all the default settings with really no configuration whatsoever, and then it'll kind of spin that up, or I can have full control and I can completely customize my options, which more often than not, I'm going to take the customized option. But I'm going to go ahead and select my resource group, select my subscription that I want it to be in. Notice resource group location gets grayed out. Again, it's a global service. It is not going to care which region your resource group is in. I have to give this a name. This is not the globally unique name. This is just the name of my front door instance. So I can name this whatever I want, as long as it doesn't match a similar front door environment that I already have. Call this my front door 2. Notice that if I chose my front door 1, it tells me that my front door. Notice that it's already in use. I can't use that. I need to do something to change it. Choose my tier, whether it be standard or premium. Go with the premium option. I can add my certificate in here. Again, this is if I want to bring my own custom domain with my own certificates. So I can go ahead and add that here if I wanted to, and it leverages Azure Key Vault to go ahead and perform this management capability. So I can load my certificates into my Azure Key Vault. I need to make sure that my front door has access to my Azure Key Vault, either via role-based access control or access policy, depending on what your method of IAM is on your Key Vault. I don't have a custom certificate, so I'm not going to worry about this at the moment. Now, the next step is to go ahead and add my endpoint. So I'm going to go through the process here. My endpoint name is going to be my demo app 1. And notice I'm going to get the lovely and fairly ugly endpoint hostname .azurefd.net. Notice that Microsoft now throws in this little hash generated piece to make this globally unique for me. Now, I can go ahead and unenable the endpoint. Obviously, it'll warn you, hey, if you do this, traffic's not going to be delivered to this. So we just want to make sure you are aware of that, which I'm totally aware of, so that's fine. Go ahead and add my endpoint. Now, underneath my endpoint, I'm going to have my routes right here, and then I have my associated security policies. So I'm going to go ahead and add a route first. I'm going to call this my default route. Again, domains, if I had a custom domain, I can come in here. I can use another Azure, I can either use Azure Managed DNS, if I had a DNS zone with my custom domain being managed by that, I could, or I can pick a different DNS service and put my custom domain name in. Then I would need to make sure that I go ahead and have my certificate loaded up. I can either bring my own, and I can pick that out of my Azure Key Vault, or I can have Azure Front Door manage that. Minimum TLS version 1.0 is being deprecated, so just make sure you leave that on 2.0. But I'm going to go ahead and add in, so we'll call this ccwd.com. Now it does notify you that yes, my domain will need to be validated before traffic is delivered. So I need to prove that I own this domain before Front Door will actually deliver traffic to it. Leave that blank. Now, patterns to match. Again, we talked about the most specific route being what Front Door prefers to match first. So you can actually select multiple patterns for your routing rule. So I can put in a catch-all /star. I could put in a /images/uploads, right? I can also put in /videos/uploads, right? So I could add multiple paths, right? And the routing will match on all of these different patterns, as long as the request has this specific pattern. So I don't have to worry about creating a new route for every single pattern. I can add multiple patterns to a single route, as long as the backend that's servicing these is the same. For my intents and purposes, I'm just going to leave the catch-all. Now, I can choose to accept both protocols, or I can be restrictive and say, yep, only want HTTPS. Even if I select both, I have a little checkbox that says, hey, just go ahead and redirect to HTTPS anyways. Totally up to you. Now, origin group, I currently don't have one available, so I can add a new origin group. So I can go over here, create a name, image, servers, right? And I'm gonna go ahead and create. This is my image, servers. And I can tell it, hey, is this a Azure blob? Is this a storage static website? Is this a cloud service? Is it an app service? Is it a static web app, API, app gateway, just a random public IP address? Is it traffic manager? Is it Azure Spring Cloud? Is it container instances, or is it something custom? Again, if it is, a certain service, notice it will auto-populate that service that's in here. All right, so if I choose Azure Blobs, notice my blob storage counts come up. Notice that this does span across my subscriptions. So Azure Front Door is tenant level. So as long as all of my subscriptions are in the same tenant, I can go ahead and access services that are cross subscription. They don't need to be in the same subscription as my front door. Okay. Now, once I add my origin group and my origin path, I can specify what my forwarding protocol is. I can either choose to match whatever the incoming request is, or I can say, you know what, it's got to be HTTPS, or I'm not forwarding it whatsoever. Caching. I can specify how I would like front door to cache, right? So I can say, hey, use the query string, or I can tell it to ignore it, or I can include specific queries if I need to, or I can ignore ones that I don't want to be included. It's completely up to you. I can also enable compression there as well. Now, once my route has been added, I want to make sure I go in and add my security policy. I want to give my security policy a name. Select which domain I'm choosing, and also pick my WAF policy. Now, because I don't have one created, I'm going to go ahead and create a new WAF policy. Notice that by default, the premium provides the protection for those OWASP top 10 vulnerabilities. And I have more configuration options if I need them. Call this default one. And I can select if I want bot protection or not. I'll just go ahead and create that. I can go ahead and save my WAF policy. Now, once we're all done there, we'll just go ahead and go to review and create and spin up our Azure Front Door. Now, because this does take a bit of time to spin up, I went ahead and already spun up one ahead of time. So we can go in and take a look. Now, notice under, I guess, first place to go to is I don't have a security policy as part of my standard setup. So I'm going to go back in here. I'm going to name this security I can spell correctly, so you know this is live. Policy 1. Oop. And I'm going to select, right? WAF policy 1. Now notice this one does not tell me it's that default OWASP rule set. So remember, that is not available in the standard SKU. It's only available in the premium SKU. So once my WAF policy is created, I get to go in and configure the specific policies I would like to enable. And the portal is going to take a hot minute for the policy to show up. Here we go. All right, so you can see here, I've got my WAF policy. Go down to my policy settings. I can set my redirect URL if for whatever reason the WAF policy detects something malicious. I can redirect a user to a specific notification that says, yep, hey, you are redirected here because we detected something that violated our WAF rule. Now, notice I don't have any managed rules. Notice that's simply because managed rules are only supported in Front Door Premium or if I had the original Front Door Classic. The other thing that this does is policy mode is currently set to detection and not prevention. Right? So I'm only going to detect rules. Now, with a standard SKU, if I do want to have some sort of rule, I can author my own custom rules. And I can give that rule a name, whether I want it enabled or not, what type of matching, right? Do I want it to be a match rule or a rate limit? Okay. And then give it my conditions, right? So maybe it's geolocation or IP address, right? So maybe I want to specify a geolocation and, hey, if this traffic is coming from, and we're going to be somewhat mean, right? It's coming from Russia, right? Then deny traffic, right? Or I can go, right? If it's also coming from China, right? I don't want traffic from there either. I can enable this my global block policy. And go ahead and hit add. Oop. Give this a priority of 1. And there you go. I now have a policy in place that I authored myself. And it basically says, hey, if anything is trying to come from Russia or China, I don't want it accessing my website. And it's going to be a match type rule set. Go ahead and hit save, and then we'll update my WAF policy. Okay. So that's what you would typically do with the standard SKU. Again, premium SKU, you're going to have those default managed OWASP rule sets already. You can still add your own custom rules if you so choose, but you're going to get the added benefit of having the OWASP rule set already enabled for you. Now, Front Door Manager, I can hop in here. I can take a look at my configured endpoints. You can see that I have one endpoint currently set up. It's got my WAF policy with my domain, and then I have my route configured. I can take a look at the route. I can go ahead and edit this and see the different domain, what paths, patterns I'm matching, what protocols I'm accepting, which origin group it's going to, what my forwarding protocol is. And if I had multiple rules on this endpoint, right? So say I had multiple web front ends and I wanted to change which route was the priority, I can do so. So I can move my different routes up and down the order within my route selection right here. I can also take a look at my domains. Again, I'm not currently managing any custom domains, but if I wanted to, I could go in here and set that up after the fact. So maybe I initially configured my front door, took the default just to get it up and running, and then I wanted to come back and say, hey, I want to go ahead and add in my custom DNS. You can still do that within the domain section. Or if I've added multiple different custom domains, I can manage those right in here in this section. I can also manage my origin group. So I can see the origin group that I've created, right? The origin host name. So you can see that I've got my app service set up, that it's enabled. I've given it a priority of 1, and I've given it a weight of 1,000. So pretty much everything is going to go to there, right? The higher the weight, the more traffic it's going to handle. My health probe is enabled. I configured it for HTTP, so it's going to go over port 80. And I'm going to check health status on just the base domain path using the head probe method. And I'm going to have that do that every 100 seconds. Okay. Now, also notice that there are optimizations. Again, we talked about caching. There's also compression capabilities. Those are currently disabled at the moment, but I can go back into my route. And if I did want to enable these optimizations, I can absolutely do so. I just need to enable caching, again, provide that query string behavior, and then I can also enable compression. And once I update that, then you'll see that those optimizations should turn to a nice little green check mark, and I'm now optimizing traffic for my front door. So instead of having to constantly go from origin all the way to host and back, right? My users will just need to go to my front door, and then they'll get returned the information, because front door will start caching all of those different file types and compress them to help save some space. So fairly handy optimizations. I can manage my certificates in here. If I've brought my own certificate and I'm leveraging Azure Key Vault to do so, those will be managed inside of your secrets. I can also take a look at some of the reports. So again, we talked about overall SRE practices and taking a look at, user happiness, how much data am I sending back and forth? Is there some sort of bandwidth cap? What type of latency are my users experiencing? Are they getting certain error codes, right? So all of that is going to be under the report section. I can also take a look and see where my traffic is coming from, right? And I'll get different little points here on the map that says, hey, this is where a good bit of your data is coming from, what kind of bandwidth, how many requests, how often are they hitting the cache, how often are they getting a HTTP 500 error, what's their average latency, right? Requests from the edge. So a lot of rich data based on location. I can take a look at my cache, right? See how often my customers and my end users are using the cache instead of having to go make a full round trip. I can see what my top URL is, depending on how many I'm hosting on my front door environment. I can also see who the top user is, or referrer, I should say, that generate traffic to AFD. So depending on the back end, maybe one's being hit a little too hard. So maybe I need to kind of redistribute my weight amongst my various origin groups. And then again, I can also see who my top 50 user agents are. So I can see which IP is sending the most requests and how much data they're hitting. So maybe I'm getting spammed or high user. All of that is available inside of reports. Additionally, you have all the standard alerting metrics, log data as available in pretty much every other Azure service. But I find that primarily a lot of this data that you see inside of the overall logs, you're going to find inside of the analytic reports. So most of the time when I'm troubleshooting or taking a look at any data as it relates to my front door, I'm going to be inside of the analytic reports versus down in the monitoring section itself. But you can see here, I can go up and I will click my, oh, that's not what I wanted. Right, so I can open up a link. No, that's not what I wanted. And you can see that my web app is up and running. I went to the HTTPS address. Notice it redirected it automatically. I didn't have to put that in. And I get the nice little fun default page itself. And I can go back down to reports. I should see at least some data here. It'll take a second. And spam this a little bit more. Usually takes about 5 minutes for data to show up. Come on. All right. Well, portal's being a little slow. But other than that, I didn't have much else to show you. It's in regards to front door. I really thought the data would pop up a little quicker, but the portal is just not being super fast right now. But other than that, that is Azure Front Door. Hope you guys understand where Front Door can play in protecting your critical applications, how it fits into growing SRE capabilities, and how just the combination of leveraging SRE practices with those critical applications and the power that Front Door can bring to that overall story. And with that being said, happy to take any questions that anyone might have. You're very welcome, Alex.
Anyone have any questions for Derek? All right, I think everyone's got their questions answered before they were even asked.
All right.
So I think we're good. Derek, thank you very much for your presentation. Appreciate you taking the time and joining us from South Carolina.
No, thank you. Appreciate you having me on your user group. Appreciate it very much. And hopefully everybody will head back to your organization or your clients, and maybe you can teach them a little about Azure Front Door.
Absolutely. Before everyone takes off for the evening, I just have a couple of concluding slides that I'd like to go through. And so let me go ahead and share my screen. All right. So as mentioned previously, the meeting is being recorded and it will be posted on YouTube, and the link will be shared in chat. And actually, let me go ahead and do that right now. Sorry, pardon the technical difficulties. Let me go ahead and do that again. So in the chat window, you will have link to the YouTube channel. If you subscribe, you will get notifications once the video is edited and uploaded there. In addition, there is a link to my blog where the technical events that we'll cover in just a little bit are going to be posted. And more importantly, the eval form. If you would please take a moment to fill that out so we can provide Derek with some valuable feedback. In addition, as a thank you, there will be a drawing from the eval forms, and you'll be able to win a license to PostSharp. So highly encourage you to fill those out. With regards to technical events, in July 21st, which is next Thursday, there is the Great Lakes Users Group.net, which meets online. And they're going to be meeting, that is the third Thursday of the month. And then on the fourth Thursday is the Cleveland C# VB.net user group. And there we're going to be talking about logging. And that group also meets online in the evenings. August 10th will be the August meeting of this group, Azure Cleveland. And we're going to have Joe D'Antoni, I believe is how you pronounce his last name. But he'll be talking about Azure Active Directory for data professionals. With regards to conferences, July 29th is, oh, pardon me, I need to scratch that. That conference has been scrapped due to low attendance. But on July 29th is Cincy Deliver. That'll be happening in Cincinnati. And that is a conference that covers both agile as well as development topics. August 8th through the 10th is Kansas City Developers Conference, or KCDC. And you can find information for that at kcdc.info. And then on August 9th is the annual .NET Conf conference that'll be taking place online. And the link for that is focus.netconf.net. And this year it's going to be focus on Maui. Lastly, August 17th through 19th is Codepalooza happening in Louisville, Kentucky. And that is going to be a hybrid type of conference. It's going to be both online as well as in person. So you can register for tickets there. One of the things that we always like to do is to ask for job openings. So as always, TechSystems always has jobs posted at techsystems.com/itjobs. But in addition, always like to ask, who's hiring? Derek, I believe your icon on LinkedIn said that you're hiring at your organization.
It did. Yeah, Trace3 is absolutely hiring. So you are a cloud professional who's savvy doing delivery. Absolutely would welcome you guys to submit. I will post Trace3's job site in the chat for you. Feel free to come and check out all of the jobs that we do have available.
Excellent. Also, Alex mentioned in the chat that Zorient.com, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, Xoriant is hiring. And the link for that is Zorient.com/about/Zorient/careers. And the link for Trace3 is trace3.com/careers. Those are the positions that Derek was speaking of. Anyone else have any jobs that they'd like to share with the group? And if not, is anyone looking for work? If you are, please make yourself known either through chat or verbally, or you can send me an email offline. Speaking of which, my contact information if needed, you can find me at snasser@nistechnologies.com. In addition, you can always find me on Twitter as well at Sam Nasser. And my blog is samnasser.blogspot.com. And lastly, I invite you to connect with me on LinkedIn. So with that, if there's no comments or questions, I thank you all for attending and look forward to seeing you at the August meeting. Thanks again to all those who attended, and big thanks to Derek for presenting. So
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you. All right. Good night, everyone.
Night.